Ready?
Hit it!
Hello everyone and welcome to Variety Theatre, the Spice of Life podcast with Maria Lovelady
and Michael Alan-Bailey, a podcast that aims to bring all things variety out of the wings and into the limelight.
So without further ado, let's get this show on the road.
Coming up on today's episode,
The ultimate ballet pas de deux.
Find out which country plays the royal variety show at the stroke of midnight on New Year's Eve.
And find out who we bumped into in the audience of Joan Collins' unapologetic one-woman show.
Hello, Michael.
Here we are. Well, it's been a while, hasn't it? I haven't seen you for a whole 24 hours.
It's so lovely to be seeing you again after what has been a very exciting and fabulous week.
Hasn't it? Well, normally we would take this time to ask each other what we've been doing, but we don't need to because we've been together.
We have, and we've done lots of exciting things. We've got a lot of plans. So why don't we start with, the best thing that we've probably done this week and potentially this year and potentially our lifetimes. I don't
think there's a potential about it. I think it's definitely the best thing we've ever done. Monday night, we trotted down to the West End and we saw a Q&A with the one and only Joan Collins.
Dame
Joan
Collins. She'll be her blood will be curdling if you don't use the Dame.
We booked tickets to go and see it months ago, didn't we? It was like literally about 6 months ago.
Yeah, and it's one of those things that has just come round so fast.
So fast. And she was doing a book tour for her new book that she's got out, Unapologetic, and she was doing a Q&A with Graham Norton.
Who we love, one of our other favourites. And it was at the Drury Lane Theatre Royal, which we have discussed in previous episodes because, of course, that is where Dan Leno and Mary Lloyd were doing pantos 100 years ago. And here we are 100 years later. It's currently showing Frozen, which is probably, if not the biggest show on the West End at the moment, certainly the biggest show.
It's got to be the biggest.
And we all sat there and watched a wonderful evening with Graham and Joan, and it was just as camp and fabulous as you would want it to be.
And it was so relaxed, wasn't it? You genuinely just felt like you were sat in Joan Collins' living room listening to her speak.
Except, maybe this is how Joan lives in her living room. She came out in this tight fit bodycon dress that was kind of see-through with just lines and rows of sequins all over it. It was absolutely
black elbow length gloves. She looked immaculate. And then in the interval she changed, didn't she, to classic Joan Collins, and she came on in the second half in the classic dynasty white suit,
power suit.
She was just dripping in jewels. She was absolutely sparkling. Her hair and makeup was immaculate. She was true Hollywood glamour, wasn't she?
Exactly.
We were saying it was like the last taste. It was like the last example of true Hollywood glamour, and it was awe-inspiring.
It was. I think some of the stories that she was telling, you just can't believe. She's like, I was sat between Roger Moore and Frank Sinatra. And then she's talking about modern day people that she's hanging out with Tom Ford. And you just think this woman's career has just spanned so many decades.
Yeah.
She's just been surrounded by so many of the greats, and she's a living great among us. And I think what was amazing, what you just said, is that even though these stories were just so real, true Hollywood glamour, we felt like we were included, and we felt like we were just in her living room. There was no pretension about it at all, and it was really unfiltered.
Completely unfiltered. And
I think Graham Norton struggled with that at times because it was kind of like
you could tell, couldn't you? There were beads of sweat, and he's thinking, "Where are the lawyers? We're gonna have to clear this." That's great because that's what the audience wants, isn't it? You don't want to go and see Joan Collins and for it to just be oh, everyone was lovely. I've had such a lovely life. You want it to dish the dirt. You want it to be Alexis Carrington.
You do. And it was the real highs and lows. She was really talking about some highs in her career. And then other times she was she told this amazing story about how basically Cruella de Vil was promised to her as a role for the movie that was made that eventually went to Glenn Close, and that she just opened up. What did she say it was? The Hollywood Reporter.
The Hollywood Reporter.
She just opened up the Hollywood Reporter, and there it was, not Joan Collins, unfortunately. Well, no, not unfortunately, because Glenn is amazing, but Glenn actually got the part and she read that in a magazine. That's how she found out about it. And I just think, not even just as performers, I think anyone in any industry, it's that when you've been promised something or you think something's in your grasp and it disappears, it's so heartbreaking. And it was amazing to hear her talk so honestly about that heartbreak.
It's very comforting to know that Dame Joan Collins is going through exactly the same things as so many of us.
It is.
And like you say, it's really interesting, isn't it? That while we've been doing the podcast and everything that we've been looking into, we've really seen that variety has transcended the decades, from the old days to now, and how it's still relevant. It's still in our consciousness, whether we think of it as variety or not, it maybe in various guises. And her career kind of reflected that, didn't it? Because like you say, 1 minute she's talking about working with Betty Davis and Gene Kelly, and the next she's talking about going for dinner with Kim Kardashian. And, you just think it's completely transcends. And she's stayed sort of relevant and conscious all this time.
Yeah. And I think even the fact that we just went and listened to her talk is variety in itself. I think what a lot of people confuse variety with, and probably because it's the more fabulous photos and the fabulous videos that they recorded, all these dancing girls, the comedians, the big costumes, the sparkles. But back in the day, and certainly in vaudeville, maybe more than variety here, you used to have people giving talks. People used to come on and they'd talk about science, which is kind of where science fiction came from, because they would fictionalize all of these advances in science. Or someone would come and say, oh, I've been traveling in the Far East and these are the things that I saw. And that's just basically the early travel documentaries. And so this idea that it was all just singing and dancing isn't true. They will have had people interview big stars of the day, big travelers of the day, anyone who climbed a mountain. Anyone could get up on that stage and entertain. And that's what Graham and Joan did.
But I'd rather hear about what a nightmare Linda Evans was rather than climbing Mount Everest, personally. And we've got to do a little bit of name dropping as well while we're here. We had a gorgeous dinner at the Ivy, didn't we, before we went to see it?
We did, which was delicious.
I had a Damien Hirst cheesecake.
You did, and that's something you didn't know you were going to get when you woke up that morning.
And we just said, I don't know whether he actually designed the desserts or whether he was actually out back in the kitchen making them. I hope it was the latter.
Paintbrushes.
Damien, we've had another order for cheesecake, and he's like, oh God,
where will I find the inspiration for this one? What's my muse? Just looks at a sous chef to his right. You're my muse.
You're my muse.
A moldy carrot. You're my muse.
So that was gorgeous, our lovely dinner. And then we met and we had a lovely chat in the theatre with the legend that is Christopher Biggins.
The one and only. The one and only.
So lovely. How lovely was Christopher Biggins? He chatted to us like we'd known him for years.
He did. And, obviously Biggins, I think, is one of those people that when you meet him, you feel like you've known him for years because he's very authentic and himself when he's in the media.
We have known him for years.
And then he obviously, we just started chatting to him and he just, was instantly just wonderful and friendly and everything that you wanted him to be. And, we were talking about Panto because obviously we're about to go into Panto season, which is something we really want to cover on this podcast over the Christmas period.
Yeah.
And, who better to talk about Panto with than probably, he must be, do you reckon he's up there in terms of the most Pantos ever done?
Oh, without a doubt. Without a doubt. We mentioned, didn't we, Dan Leno to him, and his eye kind of twitched because you were like that's his biggest rival.
He's dead now. It doesn't matter. It's me.
And we were a little bit cheeky and we did ask Biggins if he would mind getting a selfie with us. And that is going to be over on our Instagram. So check out our Instagram and like our photo of us with Biggins. What more could you want from a photo?
What more could you want from Instagram in general? I think that's the reason it was made. So
I'm still on a high from the Monday. Are you?
I'm absolutely still on a high and I'm still recovering, to be honest. I'm like walking around in a sleep deprived daze.
And even more on a high because of the amazing show that we've got coming up. But before we talk about our very, very, very special guests today, let's talk facts. Let's give ourselves a little variety theatre fact. Go on, Madge, do you want to go first? What is yours?
I will go first. So I think that most people, when they think of variety shows, they picture maybe Tonight at the London Palladium, something like that. Mm-hmm. More recently, we've had Bradley Walsh, we've had Michael McIntyre do those variety shows. And you kind of have the central compere and everyone else jumps in around that. Maybe if we're talking a few years ago, we've got good old Bruce Forsyth, someone like that. But back in the day, these variety shows didn't have compares. And that is my fact for the day. So what would happen is each variety show would have a series of acts and nobody came on in the middle of the acts. It was just one after another. So how this worked is that each act would have a number. Yeah. So you might be number 1, 2, 22, whoever was on the bill.
We'd be number 22.
And often, well, that's another fact for another day, but actually it wasn't always the best, saving the best acts to last like now.
Right.
Because of public transport. So by the time the show finished, a lot of the time people had already gone home.
Okay,
so
right, okay.
Yeah, so the biggest acts were usually a little bit more in the middle of the show. So back to these numbers, each act would have a number and often the numbers could change around. So you might suddenly be on first when you were meant to be on third or whatever. And so each act had a number and the program would just list each act and their number. And then when they came on, instead of your Bradley Walsh coming on to say this next act is, there would be numbers at the side of the stage that would just change and it would say act number 7 and you would have to consult your program to see who act number 7 was.
I never knew that. That is so interesting.
So the whole idea of a compere is something that's a little bit more modern. Now, the best shows would have no time between one act and another because obviously what's going to happen, your audience is going to get restless. Maybe people think I'm going to go to the toilet, I'm going to get a drink. They might even want to go home. So this time in between one act and another was called a stage wait. And the best shows didn't have any stage waits. So they would put together acts so that maybe you would have a comedian that would be downstage front and the red curtains would be closed, what we'd call in the theatre tabs. And they would be performing right in the apron of the stage in front of the tabs. And a magician would be behind setting up while that comedian was on. Of course, then that comedian can walk off, tabs open, and there you have the magician. And in that sense, there would be no stage wait. Now, if there was a stage wait, the audience would get very unruly. And I've actually got a quote here. So I have a guy here called Napier from the Lewisham Hip.
Well, tell him to go. We're trying to record a podcast.
And he said back in the day, not right now in my living room, that a stage wait was an unforgivable sin in any performance.
My God, that's ominous.
So sometimes they might have like a musical interlude of the orchestra covering that, you know, if it wasn't maybe a number one theatre that had these big sets and all of that. But yeah, I just found that really interesting because I think a lot of the time people think of that like end of the pier show with some guy like keeping the crowd going. But back in the day, you wouldn't have that. So if the act before you that had been on hadn't been a big hit, you as the act would have to get the audience back on side. You couldn't have a funny man going on in between going, and that was those dancers. And now we've got a comedian and getting the audience rallied back up.
Yeah.
It was absolutely your job as an act.
The more you hear about theatre of this time, it just sounds so terrifying, doesn't it? You're like, why did these people put themselves through it? Absolutely. It literally sounds like the next step up from, you know, the gladiators watching people fighting tigers in the Colosseums and things like that. It's the next level.
The more and more I read it, the more I think, I don't know if I would have been able to do it.
Absolutely, I know.
Absolutely terrifying. And there was just no, I mean, the industry now, there's no guaranteed success, but there was even less success. There was almost more competition, but
and the risk of actual physical bodily harm, usually.
Yeah, exactly. And complete humiliation.
Yeah.
that's something that's so interesting, isn't it? Is that these people had to try so hard, and they had to like chop and change their acts to get attention, depending on who'd been on before them, who was coming on after them, what level of theatre they were doing, the size of the crowd. And I think that all that sort of chopping and changing and preparation and adapting to your surroundings, that's what made these people such good performers. It's not like now where you have to be a first time hit, and if you don't get a number one straight away, or if you don't get 1 million clicks straight away, then no one's interested in you. These people had time to develop their acts, and therefore their talent was just through the roof because they could adapt to any situation. They knew how to get out of it. Well, that was my fact. What is yours?
Well, mine's a very short and sweet one. Did you know that in Norway, the Royal Variety Show is aired on television at the stroke of midnight on New Year's Eve?
I did not know that.
As New Year hits in Norway, the Royal Variety Show is aired.
And is it a similar format to our Royal Variety?
No, it's our Royal Variety.
Oh, our Royal Variety.
Yeah.
Oh.
Not just a random Norwegian Royal Variety.
Well, I thought they maybe have their own. Do they even have them?
No. It's global, our Royal Variety. And did you know as well that worldwide, the average viewership of the Royal Variety Show is 152 million views?
Wow. I mean, that's incredible. Again, just showing that variety, and British variety in this case is loved and enjoyed all over the globe.
Absolutely.
Which
100%.
we know from our listenership. So everybody here, our beautiful audience, we love you. And we can see that the views for this podcast are coming in from all over the world. And that just makes us so happy.
And we love to hear from you guys as well. So please head over to our Facebook, to our Twitter, to our Instagram, and send us a message. Let us know where you're from, and we can give you a little shout out.
Oh, we'd love to give people
Wouldn't
shout
we?
outs on this podcast. Please get in touch. It would be absolutely lovely. And if you've got any facts, if you've got any anecdotes that you'd like to share with us, please get in touch and we'll share them on here too. So talking about anecdotes.
Anecdotes. If you want anecdotes, what have we got coming up for you?
I think that links us perfectly onto our guests for the week.
Now, we've talked a lot about the theatre, we've talked a lot about comedy, we've talked a lot about comedians, we've talked a lot about plays, but this podcast is all about variety. So today we bring you an interview from the world of ballet, the magical world of ballet and dance. And we are talking to two of the most renowned names in international ballet. So our special guests today are Michael Beare and Marian St. Clair. Now, they have done a bit of everything. They are huge Goliaths in the world of ballet, principals and primas in pretty much every major league ballet company in the world. They've performed in a variety of theatres from Cape Town to the West End. Like, they've done it all. And these are people, Michael and Marian are people that can call the giants of the dance world, Margot Fonteyn and Rudolf Nureyev, not only colleagues, but friends. These are really, really special people. And we were so lucky that they agreed to talk to us. Now, we've just got to clear up all these names because they've got about 1 million code names. They're like a couple of spies. So they're Michael and Marian, but Marian's nickname is Midge. So friends and Michael himself will call her Midge. She calls him Mike. Now, we know them by different names because, lucky us, they are our former ballet teachers.
They are.
They taught us ballet. I mean, they've taught in loads and loads of vocational colleges and places around the UK. We were lucky enough to be taught by them at Liverpool Theatre School, and we all affectionately knew them as Mr. and Mrs. B. So we will probably refer to them in the interview as Mr. and Mrs. B.
Even though we left them 15 years ago or something.
Oh, it never leaves you. Once a student, always a student.
You just have to call them Mrs. and Mrs. B. It's the only way.
I recorded the whole interview squeezing me centre. I'm pulling up.
I'd like to say I did just to impress Mr. and Mrs. B, but I don't think I did. I think I did the whole interview holding my breath because it was magic. That's the only way I can explain it. And this interview we have managed to chop down because we were at the house. We were very lucky to be invited to their home, and we must have been there for 4 or 5 hours. And we were
there all day.
We kept the tape rolling and we recorded everything. But in order to bring it to you guys, we've had to chop it down a little bit But this episode will be over 2 episodes because there was just so much content. We couldn't narrow it down just to 1 episode. And as we've interviewed both of them together, and they are 2 people, we thought they deserve 2 episodes. So this week sort of concentrates on their early careers.
And getting to know them.
And getting to know them as people and where their variety loves. And then the next episode, we will focus on none other than royalty. We'll just leave that carrot dangling for you there. None other than royalty.
And their time as co-founders of the London City Ballet, London City, why can't I speak?
Today.
And Michael has written a book. He's written his memoirs to commemorate and to document and record the history of the London City Ballet, because as they said, there's not much on record about the smaller ballet companies. The big ones are all there, but the smaller ones, which are really the basis of the bigger ones being founded, are kind of becoming obsolete. And he wanted to change that, which is a fantastic thing. I mean, such a treat, such a great thing for the ballet world that he's decided to do this.
And document it. And he actually did this during COVID. So good on him for not just sitting around and watching, I don't know, Jeremy Kyle. I can't imagine he watches Jeremy Kyle actually, but it's daytime television. And he actually would get up every day and write his memoirs. And thank God that he did, because now we have this terrific book, and it is terrific. And that's one of the reasons as well we've cut the podcast down a little bit, because any more stories that we were told that we've had to cut, you can read in his wonderful book.
Should we get him on?
Let's do it. 5, 6, 7, 8.
And we've got the amazing Mr. and Mrs. B, Michael Beare and Marian St. Clare joining us now. We are so grateful. Thank you both so much for agreeing to talk to us today. It is such a privilege to be with you both. So let's just dive straight in. Can you tell us a little bit about how the variety of theatre has spiced up your life?
Well, I think Michael should start really, because he came from Africa. So it was an incredible story how he got to this country. So go on, Michael.
My father used to play the piano as a hobby. So when he came home, he used to practice sometimes. And as soon as he started practicing, I would get up and start throwing myself around the sitting room floor, whirling and twirling. It was something that was just there. As soon as I heard music, I wanted to move. And I also wanted to dress up and be the centre of attention, really. I mean, my mum says he just wanted to perform. So she took me to ballet school. My dad said, yes, he'll only last a day. He'll hate it, with all the girls and everything. But my teacher, Marie Bodenstein, in Pretoria, South Africa, we'd moved from Mozambique to South Africa. She was delighted. She had a male dancer. Oh, she wasn't going to let me go. And I fortunately, I was blessed with very good feet for ballet. And when she said, point your foot, and I pointed it, she was astounded. And she said, that's it. He's not leaving me. He's going to be there. Anyway, I studied under her for about 2 or 3 years until we moved to Rhodesia, now Zimbabwe. And I did ballet lessons with my local teacher, Thelma Harris, most afternoons of the week. Whilst that was all going on, Peter Franklin White, who was a lead character artist with the Royal Ballet, came out from Britain to do lecture demonstration tours, And he came and he saw me dance at my local studio and immediately said, this boy has got to go to London. I can get him into the Royal Ballet School on my recommendation, no audition required. So within 6 months of him visiting, I went to the Royal Ballet School. So I did 4 years and I was lucky enough to get into the company. They decided that they wanted to close the touring section and amalgamate it with the resident company at Covent Garden at the Royal Opera House. Well, disaster. Total disaster. Because suddenly there were masses. It was such a big company. And you had nothing to do. Most of the time you were just sitting in the dressing room. When they amalgamated the companies, it was like going back to square one. And I thought, well, when am I going to get on? So I thought, no, this isn't for me. I didn't have anything much to dance. So Peter Darrell, who was then director of Scottish Ballet, he said, oh, don't stay with that lot down in London, come and dance for me. I went and asked Macmillan if I could be released from my contract. No, refused. Why are they keeping me here? I'm not doing anything. So, I mean, Peter Darrell said, leave it to me. And it just so happened that the so-called splinter group were going to do Pineapple Poll, which we used to do in the old touring company. And the ballet master of Scottish Ballet, Gordon Aitken, he knew the ballet inside out. Macmillan wanted Gordon Aitken to go down to put it on. And also Macmillan had choreographed a ballet for Western Theatre Ballet, Las Hermanas. And apparently, Scottish Ballet had the rights to this ballet, even though it was Macmillan's ballet. Macmillan wanted to revive it. So he asked Peter if he could have permission to the rights. And Peter Darrell said, this is the deal. He said, you can have Gordon Aitken to put on Pineapple Poll, and you can have the rights to Las Hermanas, but you give me Michael Beare. So he agreed, and I was swapped. And that's the only way I got out of my contract. And then at the end of January, I was on the sleeper train up to Glasgow. That was it. And I joined Scottish. Then I met Harold and Midge and various other dancers with them. I was taken to a performance at the Close Theatre Club, the very first performance that I saw Scottish Ballet. It was an experimental evening. Well, what a load of oh my God. I thought, I've made a mistake. What is this? What have I come to? I've given up the Royal Ballet to come to this. And it was a ballet called Sleepers. And they just, a girl rocking in a rocking chair and others going around in white nighties, just walking around singing, Rose, 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 red, something. And I went, what? A load of rubbish. I did have doubts. I thought I'd made the wrong decision. But very shortly after that, I started to do various roles in Peter Darrell's Beauty and the Beast. And then Giselle. And I was doing The Peasant Pas de Deux, and I was also a cast of Prince Albrecht, the principal role. Then I felt, and I knew, I was familiar with Giselle because we'd done it so many times in the Royal Ballet. And it just so happened that Midge, who was dancing with Ken Wells at the time, was her partner. He decided to leave and join Festival Ballet, which is now English National Ballet. And Peter Darrell immediately put me with Midge. That was the start of the partnership. So we started doing Giselle together. That was our first ballet together. And then from then on, we did everything together, Nutcracker and, well, plus lots of other roles that we did individually. But, and that's how it came. And then we had an affair and it went on. Midge was married to Harold at that time, but Harold left and went back to South Africa. Midge and I joined New London Ballet, and New London Ballet was owned by Galina Samsova and Andrei Bukowski. It was a small group of just 12 of us, and we went all over the world with that. Eventually ended up doing the Margot Fonteyn farewell performances around Britain. And we'd also got to know Margot during our days with Scottish Ballet, because Scottish Ballet became international when it did its Australasian tour, Australia and New Zealand. And
Margot went with Ivan
yeah,
Nage
and Margot
with us.
was the guest artist.
Yes.
As you know, that's the only way they could get the tour, was Margot had to dance. And I think I mentioned it in my book. Peter Darrell said, even if I have to wheel her across the stage in a block of ice, we're going. Because Margot was already 54 at the time.
Yeah.
Yes.
But she was amazing.
Yes,
And she, we got to know her very well, and she's a lovely person, and a great, great artist. And she did quite a lot of guesting with New London Ballet at that time. And that only lasted 2 years with New London Ballet. Because the Arts Council wouldn't give them sort of revenue funding unless they joined Northern Ballet, which was then based in Manchester. And then later on, of course, Northern moved to Leeds. But from that, we joined English National Ballet for Beryl Gray. We didn't want to go, but Harold said, no, you must go. It'll look good on your CV. So we spent a year there under duress. Because we did very, very little. And
But when we went to audition, she said, come and do the boys' class. Hello. And so we sat in the car park, and Michael said,
we
Mitch,
planned. Yeah.
don't dance well. He said, if we do double tours, I'm going to fall over. I said, fine, okay. And now I'll just make a fool of myself. So we did, didn't we? We fell all over the place.
Oh, yes. I pretended I couldn't do a double tour. Anyway, at the end of it, we thought, that's it. We failed. They're never going to take us into the company.
This sounds like a comedy show in itself.
She said, Tiny Marian.
Tiny.
She said, oh, such pretty feet, Michael. She said, I can offer you senior artist contract. So we did. We got senior artists.
So the plan failed.
Yeah.
So even at your worst, you got this job.
I think there was a backstory to this, because Peter Williams, the critic,
he said that we should.
No, Dame Alicia was doing Lace Feed. Dame Alicia Markova for Festival Ballet at the time, and I believe that Alicia and David Williams, the critic, had said to Beryl, Marian and Michael, you should get Marian and Michael in your company.
So that I think
that was it. So that was
probably
nothing you could have done.
Her hands were tied.
Yeah.
She couldn't go against Dame Alicia Markova. Nobody could. And Williams also. He was a very nice guy, wasn't he?
Yes, I mean we made lovely friends.
Yes.
It's all in the book. But
well, we travelled with Rudy. You knew Nureyev from the Royal, but we went to Paris for 5 weeks. He was doing his Romeo and Juliet at the Palais des Sports for 5 weeks. So we loved Paris, didn't we? We just loved
yes.
One of my favourite things that we ever did actually at LTS, I don't know if you remember, was we did the Capulets and the Montagues in Romeo and Juliet when we were on foundation. I remember doing that Romeo and Juliet because I'd only just started dancing, and I remember it all being so technical, the classes, and because I was, an older learner, it was hard to put it into performance. And when we did that with you, it was the first time I thought, oh, I can act this.
It was
character. It was character, and I suddenly realised, oh, that's why we spend an hour at the bar. Because now I can act this part, and it was just amazing. And that's, for me, that dance was when it all clicked.
Well, I think that's why with dancers, or singers, dancers, whatever, opera singers, musical theatre singers, first and foremost, you have to be an actor. You have to act. There's no point in getting up and doing all these steps that that you learn in ballet. The technique, the physical technique of ballet, unless you can act. Absolutely no point in dancing. I mean, it's like in Swan Lake, the very famous 32 fouettes in The Black Swan does. Those fouettes don't mean a thing.
Yeah.
unless while you're doing them, you are still that evil Odile, that black swan, and that you really got it in for the Prince Siegfried. Dame Margot Fonteyn was amazing because she could do it, but the eyes were still working. Even though she was doing these turns, you could actually see the expression on her face. Wow. And unless you do that, now they just go through them and you go, oh, good darling, you can turn, we know that. But why are you turning? You know, it's the reason why. Why do you do this step? And how can you do it in a different way? You know.
And it's incredible as well to hear you talk about Margot Fonteyn and Rudolf Nureyev, and, you know, to outside people and to audiences, they were these giants, they were these Goliaths in the art, but to you they were just colleagues. How strange is that from the outside? Or is it because you sort of grew up with it almost? How does it feel now?
I think we were just so privileged, and they were just so lovely as people. Sometimes the more talented the person, the nicer they are.
Yeah.
It's the ones that are sort of nearly there, that didn't quite make it, become very bumptious, you know, and you'd go, oh God, here we go, you know. But people with real talent, they're special.
In our day, there was a star system.
Yes, that's true.
You know, like in Hollywood.
Yeah.
If you think of Betty Davis, Joan Crawford, Tallulah Bankhead, you know, Marilyn Monroe,
And we
big
do, Mr.
stars.
We do think of those
A
women
lot.
often.
Yes, they're huge stars. Now we don't have a star system so much. I mean, you can be living next door to Darcy Bustle. It doesn't matter. Nobody, the sort of star system thing has faded.
The untouchable.
Yes.
These people living,
Yes.
they're almost like living myths.
Yes,
that's
yes.
it.
That's different
That's it.
now.
You've got to. It's got to be untouchable. You know, a bit like the royal family, untouchable. You know, once you start to learn all about their ins and outs, nitty gritty, private lives, and that magic thing goes. It was always something that we always thought you cannot come out of the theatre having with your hair wet from the shower, wearing a pair of jeans and a dirty old t-shirt and that, because your so-called fans or audience, they want to see the image. And, you know, I mean, Fonteyn always did.
Well, we can confirm for the listeners that Mr. and Mrs. B both look incredible still today.
Absolutely.
Just sat in their living room. So they definitely are living by what they're
And it's
teaching.
worth just mentioning as well for us, the first thing that we said to each other when you agreed to talk to us today was, what do we wear? What should we wear?
So I think this is a good point to ask you our second question, which is, who are your favourite variety theatre performers?
For me, I used to love it when Morecambe and Wise came on the telly. It was just to relax and laugh and good, clean fun.
Yeah.
Nothing lewd or anything like that, just really silly people.
Yeah.
You know, and I adore silly people. Michael likes...
I mean, but, Morecambe and Wise, I mean, when they had Glenda Jackson on.
Yes.
No one has beauty like what I have got. I mean, the scripts were just fabulous.
Brilliant.
I mean, it was that sort of thing. Sadly, we don't get as good scripts anymore. I always liked the two Ronnies. Absolutely brilliant scripts.
I think what's interesting is that you both pick double acts
Yeah.
for your favourite
Yes.
comedy
Yeah.
performers, and obviously you two are, in your own way, you know, have performed as a double act
Yeah.
for many years. Why do you think double acts have that effect on you? What is it that's so special?
Like in ballet, when you're doing a pas de deux,
Yes.
you're feeding off each other
All the
way through.
time, yes.
And I think that's the same thing with the two Ronnies and Morecambe and Wise. The repartee between
That's
them.
it. The repartee.
There was a connection there.
The chemistry.
The chemistry between the two, which made them like one.
Yeah.
You think of the two Ronnies as one.
Yes, you do.
And Morecambe and Wise as one. It's like one person, basically.
Yeah.
But
We miss them, don't we? We really miss them.
Rarely miss those.
Absolutely.
You know.
Yes.
You met briefly Ronnie Corbett.
Little Ronnie.
We were doing a gala in Edinburgh.
And he just came and stood next to me. And he likes ballet, you see. So he'd obviously seen us dance. And because there were guests on the programme, we were standing in the wings watching the next whatever. And this little person came next to me. And I turned and I said, oh, it's Ronnie Corbett. And he went, oh, how nice, he said, to look someone in the eyes.
It's really interesting that you say about having a sense of humour. And I remember, principally from you two, from being trained by you both, how much you always encouraged having a sense of humour in your work, and
Yes.
reiterating the point that you have to take the work seriously, but you don't necessarily have to take yourself seriously.
No.
Why has that always been important in your careers? Because I think people would think that ballet is very serious, very strict, very disciplined, but having a laugh has
Yes.
always been so important.
How can your body work if you don't feel relaxed and happy? You can't do it. Ballet's too damn difficult, isn't it? It's very stressful.
And have you found that that's
difficult.
been the same with the people that you've worked with over your career? You know, again, the big names, the Nurevs and the Fonteyns, did they all have that attitude as well?
Yes, I think they did. I was
I'm
never
not-
afraid.
Nureyev had a sense of humour.
Yes, he did,
I mean, he was known for his temperament. Yes,
Yes. Throwing things around.
but he also had a sense of humour.
Yeah.
I mean, Margot Fonteyn too. You know, they were relaxed. They didn't regard it as a job.
Yeah.
I think the audience can tell as well when that's the case.
I think
Yes,
so.
yes,
Yeah.
yes. And I think sometimes, particularly for youngsters who may get pushed into the theatre profession because their mum and dad wants them, and you can see that the child's not really for them.
Now that's
You
interesting,
know.
isn't it, Mrs. B? Because didn't you start off doing variety shows when you were a child?
Yeah, I did acrobatics. Yes, I used to stand on my head and do all silly things. But, you know, I was born in Hull. My parents didn't really want to have a family. My father was mixed race. At the end of the war, he went to Burma for a year. And my mother said she wanted to have a baby because she didn't know whether Daddy would survive. You know, she didn't know whether
Yeah.
he would get back or
Yeah.
whatever. And I was born while my daddy was away. And when he came back, he didn't have a job. He went back on Hull fish dock and he was filleting fish for a job to keep us going. When I was 3, our neighbour, she said, you know, you should send your Marian to Miss Boulder's dance class. So Mum said, oh, well, all right, I'll take her. And she took me, and I remember sitting on this row of chairs thinking, oh, I don't know about this. I didn't seem enthusiastic at all. Anyway, she took me back again, and they were doing something funny, dressed as chickens.
We've all been there.
That did it for me. That did it. And so I went back and I got to be a chicken eventually, and I believe what happened was I didn't do any of the dances. I stood on the proscenium march of the theatre pulling faces at the audience. But I remember that my mum's mum went to see a fortune teller. You know, people used to do that. You know, they used to see. And this lady said, there'll be a child in your family that becomes a mimic.
Wow.
And I think that
probably
that was the mimicking, because I used to mimic a lot, didn't I,
Mm.
Michael? So that was it. So I loved to act and be silly, really. And so I did acrobatics and I learned to do ballet. And then when I came over here, there was a ballet class, Miss Banks, at the old age pensioners' hut in the middle of Leyland. So she took me on and I started to do my ballet exams, RAD, you know, and all this business. From there, what happened was she was quite young and she decided to get married. She said to my mum, Marian's talented, she said, there is a school in Southport called Loretto School of Dance. I would like you to go and see them there and see if you can afford. It's quite expensive. And Mam was really good. She got a grant from Lancashire County Council.
Wow.
To help. By that time I was 15. I went as a boarder. And, you know, it changed my life. You know, Mum and Dad never had any money. We never had any money, so it was all scratching down the sofa for the odd halfpenny, you know what I mean? Because my daddy smoked and my mum used to say, go to the corner shop, Marian, and ask Mr. So-and-so, can you have 2 woodbines? Here's the change. We couldn't afford a packet.
Just the 2.
2 woodbines, so that's what I used to do. So when I went to boarding school, I mixed with girls that came from well-to-do families, and I learned how other people lived. I absorbed it. I thought, no, I love this. I love hearing what they do. You know, they can go out and they can buy new shoes. I'd never had the chance to do.
It's amazing how important that grant was then in your life, and the access to be able to get that money, and that your mum had the initiative to do that,
Yes,
and that the money was there for you.
The money was there, and also, of course, you have to do. I loved it actually because we did tap, ballet, singing, ballroom, Greek. We did everything. With one teacher, Dorothea Halliwell. And she trained, who was the other ballerina that came from there?
Belinda Wright.
Who
was famous.
Came from the same school. When I got to 19, they wanted me to take over the school because they wanted to retire. And I thought, no, I'm not doing this. You know, I need to get on stage. They had a connection with Ballet Rambert, with Madame Rambert. And they arranged for me to go down to London to audition the Ballet Rambert School. And I remember my mum and dad drove me in the little car down to London. And we parked outside the Mercury Theatre. And my mum took me in. And Mrs. Ellis, Madam's daughter, was doing the audition and everything. And she looked at me. And they asked me to wait outside. And she'd said to my mum, I'm sorry, Mrs. Alsop, because I was Marian Alsop. Your daughter's too small. She's too small. She's not tall enough. I'm sorry, we can't audition her. And my mum begged. She said, please. She said, we've come all the way from Lancashire in a day and we're going home. Please see her dance. So they let me go in and do the class. I didn't know that my mum had begged. Yeah.
And how tall are you then?
Well, I was 5 foot. I've always been, but just recently I had to go for a hand test because I'd had burning hand syndrome. And this gentleman said, was checking all my reflexes. And he said, now come on, Midge, stand against the door because I want to measure your height. And he said, how tall are you? I said, I'm 5 foot. And he went, I'm sorry, love. He said, you're 4'10", you've shrunk. And then, do you know why? Because we stopped dancing. Anyway, so they saw me do the class. Yes, they'll take me into the school. Right, okay. So I went into the school. I was in the school, I think, 4 months and took me into the company. So I started my career with Rambert.
Yeah, well, she had her eye on you.
Yeah.
They were smallish dancers, the ballerinas.
Yeah, all Rambert
at that
was
time
small.
when it was classical.
Yeah.
And Rambert saw something in Midge.
But it was Rambert was nice to me, Dame Mary. She was very nice to me. And I remember we performed at Liverpool and Mum and Dad were sitting in the car outside the stage door waiting for me to come out. And Mum had wound the window down. And Madam came waddling out as she did, And Mum said, oh, look, Matt, there's Madam. And she heard my mum. She had eyes like a hawk, that one. And she walked over to the car and she said, who are you? That was her favourite expression. Who are you? And Mammy said, it's Marian's mum and dad, Madam. And she said, who? She said, Marian's mum and dad. And Madam went, oh, the girl with the beautiful eyes.
Oh, isn't that beautiful?
So, yes, so that I've treasured that.
Yeah.
I thought that was really lovely.
And what theatre was that?
That was
the Royal Court.
Royal
Court.
Yeah.
Because the Royal Ballet Touring Company used to do
that.
We
yeah.
didn't perform at the Empire.
No.
Right.
Yeah.
I mean, I don't know why the Royal never did the Empire, because it's a much bigger stage.
Yeah, but
but the Royal Court was
Nice,
nice. It was a
nice.
lovely theatre,
Yes, it
traditional.
was. Yeah.
There was a lift, I remember.
Everybody
They had a lift.
crammed in
To-
the
to-
lift.
to go in the
Do you
lift.
know, and you
I know that lift, actually.
Yes.
yeah.
You know.
Well, that brings us to a question that we've been dying to ask you,
Go
which
on.
is, what is your favourite theatre? Of all the theatres you've performed in your vast career, what would you say is your favourite theatre and why?
I think we both came to the same conclusion, didn't we, Mike?
Yeah, I think the Theatre Royal and Opera House in Northampton. When we formed together with Harold King, London City Ballet,
Yes.
it was the theatre where we got our first full week of performances.
Yes.
Instead of just one-nighters.
Right.
And so it was really, really important, because it was such a success. We full houses for the entire week, absolutely jam-packed.
And what time did we finish the shows at night?
We started at 7:30 and the curtain came down at sort of 10 to 11.
Yes.
Wow.
Yeah.
And people were worried about missing the last bus home. But they did. They all stayed.
Yeah.
These theatre managers know other theatre managers, around the country. And so when Harold wanted to book dates, like in Colchester, the Mercury Theatre, and Derby, places like that, they all said, yes, we want London City Ballet, because we had been such a success that first week in Northampton. And that literally, from there onward, we just got date after date after date. I think, of course, the Royal Opera House, when I came over as a student from Africa, and seeing the Royal Opera House, I was 16, I'd never seen a theatre of that size. Well, they didn't have anything like that out in Africa. I couldn't believe how amazing it was. And the orchestra happened to be rehearsing, and I sneaked through the past door, and I went, and I looked at this curtain, and I went, this is where I want to dance. It is magical. It's, by today's standards, it's not the biggest of stages for ballet. The Colosseum, I think, is slightly bigger. And when you think of the theatres in Europe, and particularly in Russia, like the Mariinsky in St. Petersburg and the Bolshoi in Moscow, the stages are huge.
Yeah.
I mean, Munich and in Germany, massive stages, which is ideal.
Yeah.
Rarely the times come when the Royal Opera House should just be kept for opera, and there should be a new opera house should be built.
For ballet.
High tech for ballet, because you can't extend that proscenium arch. I mean, the depth is there, but and I think when the Bolshoi and the Mariinsky come over to dance in London, I mean, for them it's cramped a bit.
Yeah.
They can't let fly. They're used to huge stages in Europe. That's why Ashton and people, their choreography is very, very intricate because of the size of the stages.
Yeah.
Sadler's Wells was small,
Michael, do you remember, there's one little theatre that sticks in my mind. When we were in Cuba, we went out. Matanzas. That sticks in my mind.
Yes.
Mike and I, we got a letter via the Royal Ballet telling us that we should go to Cuba to guest at the festival. We were invited, you see. This was from Alicia Alonso, and you don't say we can't go.
You will appear.
You will appear.
in the Cuban dance festival.
And Harold
And we went.
Yeah, that's brilliant. Go. So we flew out, didn't we? We got to the hotel, didn't we?
It was a lovely hotel,
Lovely.
which had been formerly the Hilton.
Yes, it was the Hilton.
But it wasn't the Hilton.
Michael was on the 12th floor, and I was on the 4th floor, because you see, you weren't allowed really to chat about anything. you know, with being communism.
You have to be very,
very careful what you said.
it.
You know, there was one American guy who was invited to the festival.
Clark
Tippett, yeah, and he was mouthing off
about their politics
and everything, and they cut off his air conditioning and everything in his hotel room. But anyway, we got there, and there were 3 theatres performing. There was it's the Bolshoi.
The Bolshoi,
yeah,
doing Romeo and Juliet in one.
I thought it was Swan Lake.
Or Swan Lake, I can't remember. Yeah. Then the Cuban Ballet were doing
experimental
ballets.
Works. And Alonso was dancing in the experimental, and you know her sight was really going by that time. So
and then the third theatre was for the guests, all the foreign guests.
Yeah, they flew in from all over the world. All these, it's fabulous, you know. So what happened was, they televised our performances to the public. It came through on their tellies live, which was brilliant. Anyway, so we did Walpurgis Night.
Yeah, which is sort of a big Russian.
And we did it because we used to do it with Galina and Andre because they did Walpurgis Night and she taught it to us. So it was quite authentic.
We knew it.
We knew it. Well, we'd done it so many times anyway. So we were comfortable with that. And
there was, during the performance, there was all this, they were hissing. And I said, Mitch, they hate us.
Yeah, he was talking to me while we were doing the podcast.
Oh my God.
Keep going, Mitch, they hate us.
Anyway, we finished the performance and everything.
Yeah.
But then we had all these curtain calls.
Wow. People were clapping and stamping.
The next day, the lady who was looking after us, she said, you've had such a success in Havana. And I said, why they hiss? They don't like us. And she said, no. She said, that's the way they show their appreciation.
Can you believe it?
They go, when they think something's good. Yeah. And so because of that, Alonso called us to her office and she said, you will dance in Matanzas, which was another town.
Yeah, with the other Cuban principals.
Principals.
Yes.
So this was the beautiful theatre that you remember.
Oh.
Yes, it was a Spanish, obviously Spanish architecture being in Cuba, colonial.
Oh, God, it was beautiful. We went on a tin bus for 2 hours with the other principals from the Cuban Ballet, and they were great. They were fabulous. And num bums and... 2 wardrobe mistresses, wasn't it? And of course it was all done with tape, wasn't it? Taped music. Anyway, we got to this theatre, and when you went in, it was all pale blue and gold.
And there was a
pale
beautiful
blue velvet and,
dressing room where Anna Pavlova had used, and it hadn't been changed.
Wow.
Had the sort of mother of pearl
dressing tables.
And the candlesticks with
no electric lights, you see, candles to get. So they gave me this dressing room to go. Oh, it was brilliant, wasn't it, Michael?
It was a lovely theatre.
Lovely theatre, lovely audience, and it was like a cowboy town, wasn't it? It's sort of shacks and things. You thought, God, what are we doing here? But when you got into the theatre, you thought, it was such a privilege to go with the Cuban dancers and everything.
Alicia Alonso, she said, I want you to do Swan Lake with the company.
Will you stay? Can you stay?
We said,
no, we've got to get back.
We've got to get back to Aberystwyth for a performance with London City Ballet. I mean, what fools we were. We could have guessed it with the Cuban National Ballet. But
Aberystwyth called?
Aberystwyth.
So we flew in from Cuba, and Julian... a mutual friend of Harold,
drove us to
Aberystwyth. We'd hired a cottage, and one of the girls from London City Ballet was in. They'd lit a fire because it was so cold, everything. We were knackered, the two of us. We were so tired, and it had just been one long journey.
Was those sort of things, which you think...
I said to Michael, why don't you call your book Cuba to Aberystwyth?
I love that. That's incredible.
I think that's what we can call this episode.
Yeah.
I could listen to that all day.
And we did. All day.
And as soon as we left their house, didn't we? We were like, when can we go back? Well, let's try and work out a time that we can actually go back, because there was just so much more to be talked about.
It was like we just scratched the surface, wasn't it?
And like you said, they graciously invited us to their home. We had such a lovely afternoon. They did us a lovely lunch. I don't think I had an evening meal that night because we were that stuffed, weren't we, leaving their house?
And we sat in their summer house as well in the garden, which was stunning for our lunch. Beautiful.
And we just chatted away. It was gorgeous. It was just the most gorgeous day.
So as we said at the beginning of the episode, there is so much more to still learn about this wonderful showbiz couple. So in a couple of weeks, we will be airing the second part of this interview, and we really would encourage you to tune in again, because it is magic. It's just like a warm hug, and yet so inspirational of how hard that they worked and that success is possible. And also a showbiz couple staying together.
I know, it's a rare thing, isn't it?
Mm-hmm.
It really is.
All of these experiences together as a couple, and how wonderful that they get to sit now and share these experiences with us. And they are absolute. People throw the term couple goals around quite a lot, I think. But really, couple goals applies to Mr. and Mrs. B.
They are the number one spot. They are the gold medal winners. Silver being Richard Madeley and Judy Finlay. So I can
imagine that Mr. and Mrs. B would make a fabulous book club.
Well, first book being read in the club being Mr. B's fabulous book.
Exactly.
And
if you would like to get your hands on that book, then please do get in touch with us, because you can buy them directly from Mr. B himself. And so we will put an order in for you, and we can arrange that to be sent straight to your door.
Yeah, Michael requested, didn't he, that any interest in the book, get in touch with us and we will direct you to them, because that is probably the easiest way to do it. So like we said, please tune into the second part of our interview, where we discuss Michael and Marian's involvement with the London City Ballet and their very, very special royal patron. Who could it be? Find out soon.
And just to entice you with another little carrot, we have got a very, very special royal episode coming up ourselves in the next few weeks. And I think that's all we're allowed to say at the moment, isn't it?
Oh, I hate it. I hate having exciting things to say and not being able to say it.
Yeah, so me and Mike have had a really, really exciting week, and there is some royal action happening in the next few weeks, and we would love you to tune back in again to be part of that. Thank you so much for listening. We really, really couldn't do this without you. The podcast is growing so fast, and we are getting our love for music hall and variety out there into the world, and really your support has been absolutely wonderful.
Please make sure that you like, rate and review our podcast on your podcast provider, wherever you're listening to the Spice of Life podcast, and give us a little shout out on social media. Get in touch with us on our Facebook, our Instagram and our Twitter. It's Frame This Presents, and on Twitter it's Frame This Presents SOLT. I should really write that down and just read it every episode, shouldn't I, instead of trying to remember it?
Well, I don't think there's going to be many other SLOPs around, so hopefully they'll find us one way or the other. All that's left for us to say is...
See you next week!
Former principals and primas in every ballet company around... Company?
Company!
Company!